Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and Gamefound over the next week. If you're new here, we do this every single week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you do want to stay up to date, this is the place to be. And I do always like to start these by going over some news and announcements that I just found out about. And if you haven't heard about this one yet, there is actually a new Wingspan game announced. This one's actually going to be called Finspan because this one is going to be taking you into the ocean. If you're not familiar with the lineup already, we had Wingspan, which had you focused on building up an ecosystem for birds. And then we had Wormspan, which I actually haven't played, but I think it had you exploring caves and raising dragons. And then this one's going to have you diving into the ocean and collecting different fish. Stonemaier Games did already post some info with some of the differences on this one, and one of the things that I find really interesting is that you can actually play different fish on top of each other as long as the fish you're playing is bigger than the previous one, since bigger fish normally eat those smaller ones. Stonemaier Games don't go to crowdfunding anymore, so you'll have to find this one in retail, but that is pretty much all the news I have other than a quick mention to Alex over at Boardgame Co., who also looks like he already covered Finspan, so if you do want even more info on the game, you can go ahead and find a link to his channel in the description down below. I always do like to mention him because him and I do work together keeping track of all these upcoming campaigns, and I do these videos every single week, but he posts up a video at the start of each month giving you a bit more of a sneak peek into the future. He does also run his own board game retreat, which I always do try to attend, and I will be attending this year, and it's actually happening just a few weeks from now, and he did just post up a video going over the details for that. So if you do want to learn more about what the Level Up retreat has to offer, I really recommend going if you are able to. It's really focused on playing games, winning games, and entering competitions for games. There's all sorts of different things you can sign up for, but there's also a huge library full of all sorts of old, new, and hot games that you can feel free to check out. And if you see me there, feel free to say hello or even rope me into a game because I am definitely always down. And that's all I got for an intro, but this looks like a really good week because there are quite a few games this week that I am really interested in, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on January 13th, and this one is called Yomi 2 Road to Morningstar, and this one is a head-to-head fighting card game, and it is based on the original game Yomi, but this one does make some changes to the system. The biggest changes is that they're going to be introducing these different types of gems that each have their own cards, that if you choose a gem, you're actually going to be combining it with the character that you choose, combining their cards together and creating all sorts of different permutations. There's also different types of attacks that allow you to aim high or low, which also will require you to either block high or low if you're defending against those. You can perform all sorts of combos to gain an edge and speed up your attacks, and this new version also introduces a system that gives you more control over your hand because it also allows you to exchange any cards from your hand with cards from your discard pile if they do have matching icons. But like I said, you're going to be choosing a character and you're going to be choosing a gem, and then you're going to be combining those cards together with your character deck, introducing all of your attacks, throws, blocks, and dodges, as well as your special moves and super moves. Each player is going to be starting the game with their own hand of cards, and then they're going to be using those in order to perform all these different fighting combos, and performing these combos can increase your super move meter, which you can activate later in the game, but you can also increase that meter by discarding cards from your hand. You are able to get those cards back because each round you will be drawing 2 more cards back into your hand. Once you've drawn those 2 cards, you can then exchange any cards from your hand with the matching icons like I mentioned before, optionally play 1 ability card in order to augment your turn, and then you'll be able to discard any of your cards to power up your power meter. One other thing to note about the gems in this game is that each one does offer you with its own ultimate attack, but you can only use this once per game, and it's at this point in your turn that you can choose to do that. But after you've done all that, each player is going to be simultaneously revealing a card from their hand that they want to use to issue their attack, and then you're going to be comparing the different moves that each player has chosen, and depending on that combination, there's going to be different outcomes and different winners, but of course there'll be all sorts of special effects and abilities that you'll be able to use in order to augment that attack further or mitigate the damage done. Whoever does win also gets the option to play additional cards in order to form a combo, and then the game ends once a player's health reaches 0 or when a player has exhausted their deck twice. If you do want to learn more about this one, I will have it linked in the description below, and of course you can click to follow along and get notified once it launches. Launching on January 14th, we have Master of Orion ad Astra, and this one is a 4X game based on the video game with the same name. I haven't played the video game, and I actually haven't heard about the video game before I heard about this board game, but I do want to say that this board game does look like a lot of fun. It looks like a 4X game that I would really enjoy, and this is a game where the winner is the one with the most victory points, and there's multiple ways that you can try to accomplish this, and you can choose to specialize in different areas or gain points from all these different options, but you can either build up your population, build or acquire different buildings and control them, upgrade your tech trees, control different systems, complete different missions, and try not to lose victory points from unrest within your population. Players are going to be playing as different factions, each with their own game-breaking special abilities, as well as their own personal player board that is also unique to them, with a different upgrade tree and different paths that you can take that will allow you to be more proficient in certain areas than others at the start of the game. The game also has a few different ways that it can come to an end. Either a player controls an opponent's system for long enough, or they control the Orion system for long enough, which is the last system that you're going to be discovering while exploring the board, or if a player is able to build a certain building and protect that building long enough. If none of those things happen, the game still will come to an end after 6 to 8 rounds, depending on the length of game that you decided to play. But one of the big reasons that I find this game so interesting is because this one looks like it's going to be offering a ton of variability, and part of that comes with the different factions you can choose, as well as the variability in the map as you're exploring the different regions and drawing different tiles and cards. But what really makes this one stand out is that you are able to manipulate your character so much as you play the game. You're going to be acquiring new cards that you can either add to your hand or add in front of you as a permanent ability. So your character is going to be constantly changing as you play the game, which can constantly change your strategy depending on what you choose to do. And that in itself is going to make every game feel so much different from each other, even if you do choose to play the same faction over again. But the way that you do play this game is that each round you're going to be choosing a card from your hand in order to take an action, and what's really cool about these cards is that each one can actually have multiple options for you to choose from, and you're just going to be choosing one of those options. And you can also spend credits in order to upgrade almost any action that you can take. And you're going to start with some basic cards that grant you access to those core actions in the game, like moving your ships around out on the board. And the way that this works is they're going to be moving up to your speed, and you can move through any discovered spaces, but if you move into an undiscovered space, you're going to stop there and then draw a tile randomly from a stack, which can reveal different locations, planets, or anomalies, which can grant you with all sorts of different options. There's also actions that allow you to build mines in order to gather resources, or even spend those resources in order to build buildings or increase your population. And when you do choose to increase your population, you have a few different types of specialties that you can improve, and each of those are going to be improving their related actions. Of course, you can also use actions to upgrade your tech tree to unlock new abilities and special effects, or you can build your diplomacy, which allows you more leeway with the space councils, allowing you with special privileges. But of course, there is also actions to attack other NPC characters that you find out on the board, or even attack the other players. The way that this works is that you're going to be rolling dice and then assigning them to your different weapons out on your ships, and those weapons can also be upgraded in order to have even more devastating attacks. But what's also really cool about these cards is that at the start of each round, you're actually going to be going through a drafting phase and adding a new card into your hand. These cards are known as technology cards, and they're a little bit different than the basic cards that you start with because they will have a special ability associated with them, and you can use it as an action in order to use that effect. But each of these cards also come with a requirement on them, and if you're able to meet that requirement, you can actually use an action to deploy that card in front of you as a permanent upgrade to your character, mixing in all sorts of new special abilities that are not normally native to your faction. But the game continues like this until one of the players is able to trigger one of those endgame conditions, and then after players have resolved that final round, you're going to be adding up your victory points from the different sources and upgrades that you've made throughout the game, and the player with the most victory points wins. And if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description down below. And this next one I thought was launching last week, but it got pushed back until now, and this one's going to be launching on the 14th, but this one's a new expansion for the game Darwin's Journey. I really do love Darwin's Journey, and I do recommend that you check it out if you haven't had a chance already, but if you missed that original footage, I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. This is going to be adding a bunch of new content that you can mix into the game, but it's also going to be introducing a couple new mechanisms as well, which I will get back to in a second here, because if you are not familiar with the original game, this is a really solid Euro game where players are going to be placing workers in order to take various actions. But what is really cool about the way that the worker locations work in this game is that in order to use a location, two things need to be true. That location needs to be purchased by any player at the table, which is indicated by the lenses here, but then also the worker that you place there needs to have the appropriate seals that are also indicated on that location. What's even more interesting about that is that each player is going to have their own player board where they're going to be putting their different workers, with each worker being associated with these rows of spaces beside them. And as you play throughout the game, you're going to be acquiring new seals, and you'll decide where you want to assign those within those rows, essentially adding more seals and specialties to the various workers, which will expand the different locations that they might have access to. This is a really fun mechanism, and the game itself is really well designed. It does seem like a lot when you first crack open the rulebook, but once you play this a single time, things really flow really well and everything makes sense. And because it's so intuitive, it really does minimize the amount of frustration or overhead or fiddliness that you might experience with typical Euro games in this weight class. I guess I would classify this as just a really elegant design, and that is one of the reasons that it is still in my collection today, and it's also the reason why this one is my own personal pick of the week. But there's a bunch of different actions that you can take in this game, and you might have noticed this map at the bottom of the board, and this doubles as a place for players to sail their ships and take various actions and explore the different islands, but it also acts as the timer for the game because there is going to be a boat sailing across the bottom here, and once it reaches its final destination, it's going to be triggering that final round. You also don't want your own personal boat to fall too far behind that round checker boat because that can cost you victory points throughout the game, so of course there are action locations that allow you to sail your boat forward, and this not only keeps you up or even ahead of that round tracker boat, but you can also choose to move through different spaces that can grant you bonuses, and moving past certain spaces also grants you access to the other islands, and it is always nice to get there first because you will have first dibs on the different options and resources there. When you reach islands, you can camp there and drop off different explorers, and there's different actions that allow you to do that, and you can also discover different flora and fauna on these islands, which you can also log using other actions in order to gain money throughout the game and victory point multipliers at the end of the game. Players will also have stacks of stamps on their own personal player boards, which they can use actions to move onto these different envelopes here, and this works as an area majority where at the end of each round you're going to be checking these and seeing which players have the most stamps in those different spaces and getting the appropriate rewards. Of course, there's also actions that allow you to get more of those seals, which you can then assign to your workers to gain access to more locations, and there are also some special action locations which can be randomized every single game, and they can offer a whole variety of unique effects. Another thing that I really like about this game is that there's all sorts of different spaces out on the main board or on your personal board that if you're able to either uncover or cover up those spaces, you're going to be getting whatever reward is outlined on it. For example, placing out your camps will allow you to gain the bonus next to that specific camp token, or placing out all the stamps in a particular stack will unlock the bonus next to that stack. Players will also start the game with a few different objective cards, and you can try to complete those to earn their bonuses, and there are also different objective tiles that will be appearing throughout the game, and if you're able to complete those, you'll actually be placing them onto your own personal player board, unlocking any of the powers that you decide to put those tiles on. Players will also want to keep an eye on the different round bonuses, which are outlined and randomized on tiles at the bottom of the board, and these are going to be rewarding victory points at the end of their respective round based on the requirement that is outlined on that tile. And that's pretty much everything there is to Darwin's Journey, but there are some existing expansions and mini expansions included in the core game, but of course we're here to learn about the new expansion. And this introduces a bunch of new content for pretty much every aspect of the game, including new flora and fauna, and even including a new map with new islands that have different features like camps that all the players can use, and even different locations where you're going to be putting randomized action tiles, and in order to gain access to that action, you need to reach that location with one of your explorers. There's also new valuables that you can discover on these maps, like stamps that are worth twice the value when you're checking for area majority, or even gold coins that can pay an entire cost of something with just that single coin. But the biggest change this new expansion introduces into the game is the concept of hazards, and these are going to be outlined on different components and also on different tokens that are going to be scattered throughout the different islands. Every time you move over one or acquire a token with that icon, you're going to be moving up the hazard track, which is going to be associated with some sort of negative consequence that gets resolved at the end of each round. The problem with moving up this track is that you're going to have to deal with that consequence multiplied by your current position on that track. This, of course, can be very costly, but there is a small silver lining here because each one of these consequence tokens are also going to have a specific reward associated with them, and whoever is the furthest ahead on that track at the end of the round is going to be able to take advantage of that reward. But if you'd rather not risk it, there are different actions and locations that can grant you antidotes, which you can use to move down that track. Of course, the new expansion also comes with new player boards, which will have new special abilities that you can unlock, and many of them are going to be taking advantage of the new mechanisms that the expansion does introduce into the game. If all that sounds interesting to you, I definitely do recommend checking this one out, if not for the expansion, but at least for the base game. And this one is available on Tabletop Simulator if you do want to try it before you buy it, which I always do recommend, and I will have a link to the campaign in the description down below, and of course you can click that button to get notified once it launches. And this next one's also launching on the 14th, and this one's called Deckay, the Post-apocalyptic card game, and this one is one that I couldn't find a whole lot of info on, but this is a game where players are trying to compete for control over a city, and players are going to be choosing their characters and factions at the beginning of the game. It's going to be determining your special abilities as well as your maximum hand sizes, and players are going to be using weapons and gear in order to try and defeat their opponents. I'm not really sure how all of this works, but you'll also be able to gain material cards throughout the game, which you can then use to craft into various items, which you can then also use to try and destroy your opponents. Unfortunately, that's all the info I have, but if all that sounds interesting to you, you can go ahead and check this one out, and I will have it linked down below. And this next campaign is launching on January 14th, and this one is the next game coming from Uwe Rosenberg, and this one is also one that I'm very excited about, and it is my own personal pick of the week. The reason for that is that Uwe Rosenberg is one of my favorite designers. He's created many of my favorite games, but I think this one looks a lot different from anything else that he's created, and this one is a lot lighter than most of his games, well, all of his games that I've played. But that being said, I think this one still will offer quite a lot of depth, which is one of the reasons that this is my pick of the week, because I really do like games that are easy to get to the table, easy to teach, easy to play, but offer really good and crunching decisions. And I just realized that I might have lied because I forgot to consider Patchwork, and I would say that this one is slightly more complex than Patchwork, but really not by much. But this is a game all about growing and harvesting fruit, and there's two different tiles that players are going to be using in order to do that. There are your fruit tiles, and then there are your harvest tiles. Players each also have their own personal player boards, as well as their own stack of harvest tiles that they're going to be keeping next to their board, with two of those tiles always being revealed. The fruit tiles are going to be in a shared supply in the center of the table, and the way that this works is that there's going to be 7 different fruit tokens in a circle, and then you're going to be randomly assigning a fruit tile in between each of those. You might have also noticed that each of the player boards start with the same 7 fruit tokens at the bottom of their board in the starting position, and their position up the board indicates how much of that fruit that player currently has. The catch here is that you're not actually able to move past any of these tiles here, and in order to to actually clear those tiles, you need to complete the objective on that tile. There's a bunch of these tiles offered in the game, but you're only going to be using 9 of them in a given game, and all the players are going to have the same tiles on their board. You may have also noticed these number tokens on the left-hand side of the board, and what those are used for is to trigger the end of the game, because those numbers represent the amount of fruit tokens that have to pass that token in order to trigger the final round. This means that a player could trigger the end of the game by getting all 7 of their tokens past this 7 marker, or simply by getting 2 past that 2 marker. But the way that the rounds actually play in this game is that players are going to be taking turns drafting 2 tiles from the center of the table. The way that this works is that you're going to be choosing any one of these fruit tokens and then taking the 2 tiles adjacent to it. The catch here is that whatever fruit you choose, you're going to have to pay that cost by lowering that fruit token on your own personal player board. This indicates you spending that fruit in order to acquire those 2 tiles, which you're then going to go ahead and add into your own personal tableau. Once you've placed those 2 tiles, you'll then be able to choose one of the 2 face-up harvest tiles next to your board, and then also place that into your tableau. These tiles are all different from each other and are going to have harvest icons on different edges of the tile, and wherever you're able to connect those harvest icons to other fruit tiles, you'll be able to harvest those associated fruit. This of course allows you to push that specific fruit up your player board, but if that tile is connected to multiple other tiles of the same fruit, you'll actually get to push up that fruit that many times. And you can also place fruit tiles next to harvest tiles already in play, which will also allow you to gain that fruit. And once you've completely encapsulated the harvest icons on a harvest tile, you'll be able to move one of your number tokens down on your board in descending order, which of course makes ending the game a little bit easier for you. And that's pretty much everything there is to the game. Players are going to be drafting those different tiles, putting them into their tableau, gaining those fruit, and trying to complete those different objectives in order to hold even more fruit. And the end of the game is triggered once a player is able to move enough fruit past any of those number tokens. Once a player does that, you're just going to be finishing up that final round, and then that player wins the game unless any other player was also able to trigger that end condition on their own board, and then it's going to be the player with the most fruit that wins the game. This is one that kind of came out of nowhere for me because I didn't know about this game at all before filming this footage, but Patchwork did really well for itself, and I think I would like this one even more than Patchwork, so I am definitely very interested in this one. I probably will be back in this one depending on the price point, but if you do want to check it out as well, I will have it linked in the description down below, and of course you can follow along just like I did. And the next campaign we have launches on the 15th, and this one is called Cartref, and this one is a competitive game where at the start of the game you're going to have a stack of different goal cards, and you're going to have 3 of those revealed. And then you're going to have a stack of location cards, and each player is going to be drawing 3 of those cards at the beginning of the game. The way that the game works is that every round, players are going to be taking turns performing 2 actions per turn, and the different actions you can perform is to build a location by playing a card from your hand and putting it out into the tableau in the center of the table, placing one of your markers on it to indicate that it's yours, and then also moving the special tracker marker onto that new location. If the card that you played is compatible with the cards beside it, that could trigger its special effects, which can grant you with all sorts of different bonuses or victory points, but then you're going to be drawing another building card into your hand. The other action you can do is to claim a goal. So if you did meet the requirements of any of those 3 face-up goal cards, you can use this action. And this is often going to be granting you bonus actions or victory points, or allowing you to trigger some of your different location abilities over again. Your third option for an action is to activate any of the locations that you've placed in order to gain its ability. But this is also going to be adding a pollution token onto that location, temporarily blocking it from being used again until that pollution is cleaned. And of course, that is your final action, to remove 1 pollution token from each of your locations, making them usable again. But then you're also going to be gaining a reward for cleaning that pollution, which is usually going to be victory points. The game ends once a player reaches a certain amount of victory points, or if all those gold cards are depleted. The player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game, and if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. And the next campaign's launching on the 16th, and this one is called La Pâtisserie Rococo, which is a lighter version of the game Rococo, and it does have a different theme. The original has you designing dresses, whereas this one's going to have you creating desserts and putting those out on display in order to gain victory points. And the way this game works is that you're going to be using action cards in order to activate your chefs and assistants in order to do one of the various actions offered in the game. And one of those actions could be to hire more action cards, because the action cards do represent your different staff, but not all the different types of staff can perform all the actions. Chefs are going to be more expensive than your assistants, but of course they will have more privileges that they can grant you access to. Something that I really like about these action cards is that they don't only differ in the different roles, but each action card's also going to have its own special ability or benefit that when you use that action card to perform any of the various actions, you're also going to get the bonus on that card. But some of the other actions might be to buy different recipes, which you can see at the top of the board here, and whenever you do that, you're going to be placing it into one of the 3 slots on your own personal player board. And then you can also use actions to purchase more of your basic ingredients like flour, sugar, and butter. And these ones are just tracked on the left-hand side of your board, but then you can also use actions to buy special ingredients that are dual use, and they can be used for the different recipes that call for those ingredients, or they can also be used as toppings in order to decorate the different desserts that you create. Of course, there is a separate action in order to decorate, but before you do that, you're going to want to use an action in order to bake your dessert, and that's going to be moving it from the 3 slots at the top of your board into one of the cooling racks on the right-hand side of your board. But once you have a dessert created, you have a couple options to choose from, and these are different actions that you can perform. You can either decide to sell that dessert in order to get an amount of money multiplied by the victory points that that dessert would have granted you, or instead you can choose to display it in one of the different areas out on the main board. And that's going to grant you that dessert's victory points, but it can also help you with area majority in these different regions, which can grant you with different bonuses and victory points for the end of the game. There's also some other actions that allow you to offer better services or better tables to your guests, which will grant you with additional bonuses or alternative methods of getting victory points for the end of the game. And there are also some locations out on the board that you can only claim if you're able to achieve certain objectives. But the game continues like this, with players using those cards in order to take more actions and gain new types of cards. And the player with the most victory points at the end of the game is going to win the game. And if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. And launching on the 16th, we have Pixels and Polygons. And this is another one that I am really interested in because I think this game looks like a lot of fun. And it also has a few unique ideas with the way that the worker placement works. And it also has a really fun theme, especially for me because I do a lot of development work. And this one is all about developing video games. Each player is going to be developing their own game, creating and patching bugs, maybe releasing the game a little bit earlier than they probably should have, live updating and live patching it, and then charging extra for all those lovely things that probably should have been in the game to begin with. And all of this is going to be guided by whatever is currently hot in the market, because at the start of each game, you're going to be randomly drawing various tokens that are going to determine which genres, styles, and features that people want to see. A really cool feature in this game is that you do have your main board that you're going to be using for those primary actions to develop your game, but there's also going to be these additional action location boards that not only introduce new action locations that you can use, but they also introduce new objectives that you can try to achieve in order to gain additional victory points. What's cool about the way that the worker placement works in this game is that anytime that you perform a develop action, that will allow you to either place a worker out on the leftmost side of any of these boards, or instead to move a worker to the right along those boards, choosing one of the adjacent spaces in order to take that associated action. The rightmost actions offer the most powerful actions, and if you're the first player to get there, you're also going to get an additional bonus. Players are going to be drawing some game cards at the beginning of the game and then choosing which one that they want to develop. And then on a turn, there's a few different actions that you can choose to take. There's that develop action that allows you to either place a worker out on one of these action boards or move a worker that's already there one space to the right. Or there's also the expedited development action that allows you to take this action twice, but it does also come at the cost of gaining a penalty die. There are both good and bad dice that you can gain in a variety of ways in this game, but anytime that you gain one of these dice, you're going to be either getting the bonus or the penalty of that die. And then you're also going to have to add that die to the bottom of your board. Once you've filled up all the spaces, depending on player count, that's going to be triggering a press release for your company. And if you are in a good state, this could grant you with some bonuses, but if you're not quite ready for that press release, then that could end up causing you all sorts of negative consequences, losing your fans and hype, and potentially costing you money. But the different actions can allow you to do all sorts of different things, like gain cards of different types, but then there's other actions that allow you to play those ability cards to your player boards for ongoing special effects, or add those feature cards into your game, which will grant or cost you different resources, grant or cost you different fans in the gaming community, or dictate the type of game that you're creating, of course trying to meet the requirements of those different things that the market is looking for. Some of the different actions can also add bugs into your game, but then there's also other actions that allow you to polish your game in order to eliminate those bugs, and there are actions that you can use to gain additional investment or gain those green dice that will grant you with the different bonuses. There are also these two tracks at the top of the board that players can move up in various ways, and there's different icons on them that can grant you bonuses when you reach that location, but these tracks are essentially tracking the upgrades to your team or the upgrades to your processes. Moving up each of these will either upgrade how powerful your actions are or how powerful your cards are. The last option that you have for your actions is to perform a research action, which I believe allows you to draw additional cards or allows you to make changes to the different aspects of your game. The main board also has a loading bar, which is going to be periodically increasing throughout the game, and once that reaches the end, that's going to be triggering the end of the game, and then it's the player with the most money who wins. And if you do want to learn more about this one and understand even more about how it plays, definitely go ahead and check out the campaign page, and I will have that linked in the description down below. And that is everything I have for you this week, and I'm going to be ending this video pretty quickly because I am traveling to Punta Cana next week, and then after that I'm going to the LevelUp retreat, which, like I said, I really would love to see you there, but I still have lots to do and more videos to film before either of those trips, so I still have more work for me tonight, so I'm going to jump onto that. Thanks so much for tuning in, I do appreciate it, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.